I stood knee-deep in the snow, gripping my knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. The wolves circled me, their eyes glowing in the twilight, their breath curling in the freezing air. This was not how my hunting trip was supposed to end. 3 days ago, I had set out into the mountains, looking for fresh game. The winter had been harsh, food was scarce, and I needed to bring something back. Alone, as always, I had my rifle, my pack, and enough supplies to last me a week. But the mountains had a way of turning plans into dust. The storm had rolled in fast, swallowing the landscape in an endless white abyss. I lost the trail, and by nightfall I was wandering blind. The snow buried my tracks behind me, and soon, I had no idea where I was. The only thing I knew for sure was that if I didn't find shelter, I wouldn't last the night. Then, through the howling wind, I heard it. A sound so small, so out of place in the raging storm that I almost thought I imagined it. A whimper. I followed the sound, trudging forward, each step sinking deeper into the snow. And then I saw them. 2 small shapes huddled together at the base of a frozen tree, their fur dusted with frost. Bear cubs, tiny, trembling, and alone. My gut twisted. Their mother should have been nearby, but she wasn't, and these cubs wouldn't survive much longer on their own. That's when I heard the low growl behind me. Turning slowly, I saw them. The wolves. 5 of them. They had been stalking the cubs, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now they had me trapped along with their prey. One of the wolves crept closer, testing me. I raised my knife, knowing damn well it was a pathetic defense against an entire pack. My rifle was slung over my shoulder, but I didn't have time to aim, not in this blinding snow. If I reached for it, they'd be on me before I could fire a shot. The biggest wolf snarled, stepping forward, its muscles tensed, ready to pounce. I had seconds to decide: run, fight, or do something really damn stupid. I chose stupid. With a roar, I lunged forward, swinging my knife wildly. The wolves hesitated just long enough for me to grab the nearest cub and shove it inside my coat. It let out a surprised squeal, its tiny claws digging into my chest. I grabbed the second cub, tucking it under my arm, and ran. The wolves didn't wait long. They came after me, their paws kicking up powdery snow as they chased me through the trees. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might explode. The weight of the cubs slowed me down, but I couldn't let them go. They would be torn apart in seconds. I spotted a rocky outcrop ahead, a small opening barely visible through the snow. A cave. If I could reach it, I might have a chance. The growls grew louder. I could feel them closing in. With the last of my strength, I lunged into the cave, my feet slipping on the ice. I turned just in time to see the first wolf leap, and slammed my boot into its face. The impact sent it tumbling backward, crashing into the others. I scrambled deeper into the cave, panting, my knife still clutched in my shaking hand. The wolves stood at the entrance, their eyes burning into mine, but they didn't come in. They just watched. And then, slowly, they backed away, disappearing into the night. I sank to my knees, the cubs still pressed against me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The storm raged outside, but I had won. For now. The growl came from deep within the cave, low and guttural, vibrating through the frozen air. My body went rigid. Whatever was in there wasn't happy that I had just barged in, dragging 2 frightened bear cubs along with me. Behind me, the wolves still lingered at the entrance, their eyes glowing in the darkness. They weren't coming inside, which meant whatever was in here was worse than them. I had 2 choices: run back out into the blizzard and face the wolves, or move deeper into the cave and take my chances. The wind outside howled like a screaming ghost. I tightened my grip on my knife. I stepped forward. The cubs whimpered, pressing against my legs. My heart hammered in my chest as I raised my lantern. The dim, flickering light barely cut through the pitch black, but then I saw it. A shadow shifted. A pair of amber eyes blinked at me from the darkness. And then it lunged. I barely had time to throw myself to the side before the beast came crashing forward. It wasn't a bear, nor was it a wolf. A wolverine, massive, its thick fur bristling, its teeth bared. It had been hiding deeper in the cave, waiting, and now it was defending its home. The wolverine went for the cubs first, seeing them as the easier prey. I reacted on instinct, kicking at the beast as hard as I could. My boot connected with its ribs, sending it tumbling back, but it recovered fast. Too fast. It leapt at me again, claws slashing through my jacket. Pain ripped through my arm, hot and searing. I staggered, my grip on the knife tightening as the creature snarled and lunged once more. This time I didn't dodge. I met it head-on, driving my knife deep into its side. The wolverine let out a screech of pain, twisting violently. I fell back, blood, its and mine, spattering the icy floor, thrashed, its body convulsing until finally it stilled. Silence. My breathing came in ragged gasps. I pressed a hand to my bleeding arm. The cut wasn't deep, but it burned like hell. I staggered to my feet, wiping my blade against my coat. The cubs cowered beside me, their small bodies trembling. The wolves were still outside. I could see their silhouettes through the storm, pacing, waiting. But they had seen what I had just done. And now they hesitated. I didn't. With a grunt, I grabbed the wolverine's lifeless body and dragged it toward the cave entrance. Then, with all the strength I had left, I hurled it out into the snow. The wolves froze. They sniffed the air, ears twitching. Then, slowly, the biggest of them padded forward, nose to the corpse. The others followed. They had their meal now. I didn't wait to see the rest. I turned back inside, pulling the cubs close. The cave wasn't ideal, but it was shelter. And for now, that was enough. My arm throbbed. My body ached. But I ignored it. I had survived. The cubs had survived. That was all that mattered. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. The cave was colder than I expected. The wind outside screamed through the narrow entrance, carrying with it the distant howls of the wolves. They hadn't left. They were waiting. I needed warmth. Fast. I dumped my pack on the ground, fingers numb as I fumbled for my lighter. My arm still burned from the wolverine's claws, but I pushed through the pain. The cubs huddled close, their tiny bodies shivering. If I didn't get a fire going soon, none of us would make it through the night. Finally, the flame sparked. I fed it bits of dry moss, coaxing it to life. Slowly, it grew, flickering weakly at first, then catching the twigs I had gathered on my way up the mountain. Orange light danced on the cave walls, revealing damp stone and deep shadows. The warmth seeped into my fingers, easing the stiffness. The cubs crept closer, drawn to the heat. One of them pressed its nose to my leg, making a soft, questioning sound. I wasn't sure if it trusted me or just saw me as the only source of warmth in this frozen nightmare. I exhaled, leaning back against the cave wall. My pulse had finally slowed, but my mind wouldn't rest. Their mother, she had to be out there somewhere. And if she was alive, she'd be looking for them. A full-grown bear wasn't something I wanted to deal with. Not now. Not ever. The storm outside showed no sign of letting up. The wind was relentless, shrieking through the trees. The wolves wouldn't risk moving in this. They'd stay close, watching, waiting for their moment. I had to think ahead. Dawn was still hours away, and the fire wouldn't last forever. I needed more wood, but I wasn't about to step outside with those bastards circling. No, we'd stay put. We'd wait. And when the storm eased, I'd figure out my next move. Then, from somewhere deep within the cave, I heard it. A low, guttural sound. Not the wind. Not the wolves. Something else. Something big. The cubs froze, ears twitching. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensing. Slowly, I reached for my knife, keeping my movements slow, controlled. The sound came again. A deep, heavy exhale, like something massive shifting in the darkness beyond the fire's glow. My gut twisted. The wolverine hadn't been the only thing living here. My fire was small, its light weak. I couldn't see past the immediate glow, and I wasn't about to go wandering into the blackness to find out what else might be lurking inside this cave. I swallowed hard, muscles coiled tight. Maybe it was just an echo. Maybe I was imagining things, my brain playing tricks on me after everything I had been through. But then I saw them, two pinpricks of light, eyes watching me from the abyss. The eyes in the darkness didn't blink. They were massive, glowing amber, fixed directly on me. My breath caught in my throat. The cubs trembled against my leg, pressing closer, their small bodies vibrating with fear. They knew exactly what was watching us from the blackness. Their mother. The sound that followed sent ice through my veins. A low, rumbling growl, deeper than anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. I had made a mistake coming in here. The fire between us flickered, casting shaky shadows across the cave walls. My knife felt useless in my grip. My rifle was strapped to my back. But even if I reached for it, would it matter? A full-grown bear was something entirely different from a pack of wolves or a rabid wolverine. This was raw power, pure muscle, the kind of force that could break me in half with a single swipe. She stepped forward, and my heart slammed against my ribs. She was enormous. Her fur was thick and wild, patches of snow clinging to her body, her breath fogging the freezing air. Every step she took made the ground beneath me tremble. The cubs let out small, desperate cries and suddenly darted toward her, stumbling over their tiny legs. I didn't move. The bear's growl deepened as they reached her. Her head swung down, nostrils flaring as she sniffed them. She recognized them instantly. Her body stiffened, then relaxed just slightly, a mother finding her lost young. For a moment, I thought she might simply take them and leave. Maybe my presence wouldn't matter anymore. Then her head snapped back up, and she looked at me. Everything inside me screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. She was between me and the exit. If I moved too fast, if I made a single wrong step, this would end in seconds. Her massive head lowered, her lips curling back to reveal long, yellowed fangs. The growl came again, rolling through her chest like distant thunder. I raised my hand slowly, knife still clutched in my fingers. It was a pointless gesture, but maybe she'd see that I wasn't a threat. Maybe she'd understand that I hadn't hurt her cubs. She stepped closer. The firelight flickered over her face, illuminating the scars across her muzzle. Old wounds, battles fought and survived. Her eyes burned into mine, unblinking, calculating. Was she trying to decide if I was food, a threat, or something in between? The cubs pawed at her legs, making small, needy sounds. She didn't react. Her focus was locked entirely on me. The space between us was disappearing fast. My pulse pounded in my ears. If she charged, there was no stopping her. I had no chance in hell against something this massive. Then, suddenly, she lifted her nose and sniffed the air. Her expression shifted. The growl softened. Her ears twitched. She took another sniff, this time lower, closer to the ground. That's when I realized what she smelled. The blood. Not just mine. The wolverine's. Her eyes flickered past me, deeper into the cave, where the remains of the beast lay still. She sniffed again, then let out a sharp exhale, almost like a grunt. Her body loosened. She wasn't looking at me as a threat anymore. She was looking at me as something else, something I couldn't yet understand. The tension in the cave was thick enough to choke on. I stood frozen, the fire crackling at my feet, my pulse hammering in my ears. The bear had stopped growling, but her massive form still loomed over me, her breath fogging the icy air between us. She sniffed again, her nostrils flaring as she took in the scent of blood. Wolverine blood. Her cubs clung to her legs, making soft sounds, but she didn't react to them. Her attention was locked on me, assessing, deciding. I didn't move. Hell, I barely breathed. Then, something shifted. Her posture relaxed just slightly, but enough for me to notice. The deep rumble in her chest faded to a heavy exhale. She wasn't going to attack. Not yet. Slowly, I lowered my knife. A stupid move, maybe, but I needed her to see that I wasn't a threat. My fingers ached from gripping the handle so hard, but I forced myself to loosen my hold. She watched me, her massive head tilting ever so slightly. Her dark eyes flicked toward the dead wolverine, then back to me. Did she understand? Did she know I had killed the beast that might have been a danger to her cubs? Another long breath, Then, to my complete shock, she turned away. She moved deeper into the cave, nudging the cubs along with her, their tiny forms pressing against her thick fur. She wasn't leaving, but she wasn't attacking either. I took that as a win. I backed up slowly, never turning my back on her, until I reached the cave entrance. The wind outside had calmed just enough for me to see through the swirling snow. My muscles screamed in protest, my wounded arm throbbed, but I forced myself forward. I needed to check the surroundings. The second I stepped outside, I saw them. The wolves were back. Not just a few this time, the whole damn pack. They stood at the edge of the trees, their forms barely visible against the white landscape. Their eyes glowed like embers in the night, their breath rising in the freezing air. They had waited. They had known I'd have to come out eventually. One of them stepped forward, the big one, the alpha. He was larger than the others, his thick coat dusted with snow. His yellow eyes locked onto me. My stomach twisted. I had no rifle in my hands, just a knife, and I was already injured. If they charged, I wouldn't stand a chance. Then, behind me, a sound like rolling thunder. The bear stepped out of the cave. Her massive body filled the entrance, her breath coming in heavy, misty clouds. The cubs stayed just inside the cave, peeking out from behind her legs. But she wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the wolves, and she was angry. A deep, bone-shaking roar erupted from her chest, echoing through the mountains. The wolves hesitated. They weren't stupid. They knew the difference between an easy kill and a death wish. The alpha let out a short growl, then turned, disappearing back into the storm. One by one, the others followed. I let out a shaky breath, realizing only then that I had been gripping my knife so tightly my fingers had gone numb. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance at the bear. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She had just saved my life. And in that moment, I understood. I wasn't just a stranger in her cave anymore. I was part of this, whether I wanted to be or not. The storm had finally passed. The sky was a dull gray, the kind that came just before dawn. The mountain air was sharp, biting at my exposed skin as I stood outside the cave, looking down the path that would lead me back to civilization. I had to leave. I knew that. But as I took my first step, I heard soft shuffling behind me. I turned. The cubs were following me. They waddled clumsily through the snow, their tiny legs sinking with each step. Their mother watched from the cave entrance, her dark eyes locked onto mine. She didn't stop them. She didn't call them back. They thought they were coming with me. I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. If they followed me, they wouldn't survive. Not out there. Not in a world where people wouldn't hesitate to put a bullet in them the second they got too close. I crouched down and put my hand out. "You can't come," I murmured. "Go back. Stay with her." They just stared at me, their little faces full of confusion. One of them sniffed my hand, nuzzled against my wrist like I was still part of their family, like they trusted me. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stand. I couldn't let this get to me. I turned and walked away. The crunch of my boots against the snow filled the silence. The cubs whimpered, hesitated, but didn't follow. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I walked for hours, pushing forward through the cold, through the silence. My body ached, exhaustion pulling at every muscle, but I kept going. The memory of the wolves, the fight in the cave, the bear standing between me and death. It all felt unreal now, like something out of a nightmare. Then, as I reached the ridge where I had set up camp days ago, I stopped cold. Something was wrong. The snow was disturbed, deep gouges cutting through the white. My supplies were scattered. The fire pit was nothing but a hole in the ground, the embers long dead. But it wasn't just the mess that made my stomach twist. It was the tracks. Massive paw prints circled the area, too big for wolves, too wide for a bear. And beside them, something else. A second set of tracks, smaller, lighter, but unmistakable. Clawed feet, long, deliberate steps. I scanned the tree line, my breath coming in slow, measured exhales. The forest was silent, too silent. Not even the wind moved through the branches. Then a shape emerged from the trees. Not a wolf, not a bear, a lynx. It was larger than I expected, its fur thick and golden, its tufted ears twitching as it stared at me with unblinking golden eyes. Its muscles were lean, built for hunting, for precision. It stood perfectly still, its tail barely flicking. It wasn't afraid of me. I tightened my grip on my knife, though I knew damn well it wouldn't help me much if this thing decided I was worth taking down. The lynx stepped forward, slow, deliberate. Its eyes flicked past me, back toward the direction I had come from, back toward the cave. A cold wave of understanding settled in my gut. It hadn't come for me. It had come for them. The lynx didn't move for a long moment. It just stood there, its golden eyes locked onto me, as if deciding whether I was worth its time. Then, slowly, it sniffed the air. My muscles tensed. The wind carried the scent of blood, of bear, of something it was looking for. Its ears twitched, and then, to my utter shock, it turned its head toward the trail I had just come from, the one leading back to the cave. A cold realization settled deep in my gut. This wasn't about me. I took a step forward, but the lynx didn't flinch. It watched me with the quiet, calculating patience of a predator that had already decided the outcome before the fight had even begun. Then, as if dismissing me entirely, it moved. Not toward me, toward them. I didn't think, I just acted. I cut the distance between us, stepping directly into its path, raising my arms in a futile attempt to make myself look bigger. Not happening. The lynx didn't growl. It didn't lunge. It simply stared at me, its tail flicking once, a slow, deliberate movement. Then it sniffed again, low to the ground, its body tensing as if catching something new in the air. It wasn't just the cubs it had been tracking. The realization struck a second too late. From the ridge behind me, a sound rolled through the trees. A deep, rumbling exhale. A presence so heavy it made the hair on my arms stand on end. I turned, and there, at the edge of the tree-line, stood something that should not have been here. A second cat. But this one was bigger. Much bigger. It was another lynx, but older, larger, its fur matted from the harsh winter. Its ribs pressed against its skin, hunger hollowing its body. And yet, its movements were slow, purposeful. It wasn't desperate. It was waiting. The smaller lynx, its offspring, I realized, moved first. It stepped toward the larger one, hesitating only for a breath before the older cat leaned down, sniffing over its body. A silent understanding passed between them, something ancient and unspoken. Then, just as quickly, the larger lynx lifted its head and sniffed again. Its ears pricked forward. It had caught the scent of the cubs. I tightened my grip on my knife, though I knew damn well it wouldn't do much. This wasn't just a mother looking for food. It was a hunter that had been tracking something long before I even arrived. And now it had found them. The wind shifted, and with it came the sound I had been dreading. A howl. Not just one. Several. I turned toward the ridge, my gut twisting into knots. Shadows moved through the trees, sleek and fast, their eyes catching the weak morning light. The wolves were back, but this time there were more of them. The lynxes went rigid, their ears flattening against their skulls. The larger one took a step forward, placing itself between me and the approaching threat. But it wasn't me they cared about. The wolves weren't here for me. They were here for the cubs. Behind me, the trees groaned as something massive moved through them. The bear. The mother. She had sensed the danger, and now she was here. The wolves hesitated. Even with their numbers, they weren't foolish enough to rush a fully grown bear. But hunger made creatures reckless, and I could see it in their movements. The twitch of their ears, the way their leader lowered its head, preparing to strike. The lynx hissed, its body coiled tight, ready to defend itself. But I knew how this would end. The wolves had numbers. The bear had strength. And the lynx, no matter how fierce, was caught in the middle. The first wolf lunged. The bear roared. And then chaos. Snow exploded into the air as bodies collided, fur and claws and teeth tearing through the frozen landscape. The wolves swarmed, snapping and slashing. But the bear swung with the force of a thunderclap, sending one of them tumbling lifeless into the snow. The lynx sprang, its movements quick and precise, slashing at the wolves that came too close. But it was smaller, weaker. One of the wolves caught it midair, teeth sinking deep into its hind leg, yanking it down with a sickening crunch. I moved without thinking. My rifle was still strapped to my back, but I didn't go for it. My knife was in my hand before I even realized it, and then I was in the middle of the fight. I felt the impact before I registered the pain. Teeth sinking into my side, claws raking across my arm. But I didn't stop. I drove the knife deep into the wolf's neck, hot blood spilling over my hands. The beast let out a strangled yelp before collapsing, its body twitching in the snow. Another wolf turned on me, its lips curling back in a snarl. But before it could lunge, the bear was there. Her massive paw struck with the force of a sledgehammer, and the wolf crumpled beneath her weight. The remaining wolves hesitated. The odds had shifted. One by one, they turned and disappeared into the trees. Silence fell. I dropped to my knees, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My body ached, blood staining the snow beneath me. The lynx lay nearby, breathing heavily, its leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The bear was still standing. She looked at me, her dark eyes unreadable. Her cubs clung to her legs, unharmed. I had fought for them, for her, and now I had a choice to make. I could leave, walk away from this place, from these creatures, from the blood I had spilled, or I could stay. I looked at the bear. She looked back, and I knew my answer.